A bunch of you probably don't know this, but this show, the Demiurge Diaries, is named after a poem I wrote half a year prior. So I think it's time I read you that poem, so the reference is no longer lost on you. In wall-colored spaces we write Demiurge diaries. Each timepiece defaces our self-haunted libraries as resin encases the work we have wrought, a rope-snapping taut, passed out on the pages will know we have fought. But when we sober up, can we please tunnel down on why we sobered up? Never quite hid the frown when the encoder's cut of all that can't be said, we will have long been dead, and future people walk Earth's not invented yet. Post-nows to clearly see once we dethroned the past, I hope we'll one day be out iconoclast. Iconoclasm. Always iconoclasm. Always at the forefront of my mind, sprinkled with bi-weekly conniptions. Go out there and smash a statue. Smash some of the marble which binds us to all sides. See, there's a war going on. Always has been going on between the past and the future. History, oh, does it have practice. It has learned from itself over and over again, had eons to grind the ossified ruins of bygone culture to a knife point. But tomorrow is inventive, adaptive, unpredictable, always novel weapons attached to its shifting form, so it might yet stand a chance. Guerrilla tactics are a favorite from the future's arsenal, but can you hear the footsteps now, approaching from either direction? It seems, dear friend, that we have found ourselves in the present, upon the great moving battlefield of chronology. Remember to move swiftly, remember to dodge the splinters, and, most importantly, remember what side you're on. May the dead stay dead, may the ceaseless forward march of progress take another marble-crushing step. Hello friends, kind strangers, assorted creatures, welcome to the Demiurge Diaries. I've always known that time itself is coming to eat us. Not in the way of actually having any proof, but the idea that the monster at the end of all hallways does not hunger for our flesh has always felt a bit like the idea that I might be a brain in a jar, being fed neurotransmitters to trick me into believing I have limbs. It's plausible, it's unfalsifiable, I can imagine it being true, but my heart just isn't in it. I can't actually believe it without feeling like I'm bullshitting myself. I feel like I'm a series of character arcs, superficially haunting a meat body, and I feel like that puts me on the universe's menu. No one knows what accelerationism actually means, used to mean, before the idiots got a hold of it. If you're among the uninformed, the following will sound like a hot take, or a derisive joke, but if you're in the know, you'll recognize it as the deeply common sense, very quite sober analysis it is. Accelerationism, at its root, is entropy porn. Revolting in theory, sure, wildly harmful in practice, but at the end of the day, don't you just want to watch some fucking particles come apart? J.G. Ballard's Crash is an uncomfortably raw psychodrama about a cult of fetishists deliberately getting into automotive accidents, venerating the scars they leave, splattering against death again and again to experience this orgasmic rush of one of the highest intensity experiences you can subject yourself to, inviting the ostensibly banal gasoline punk dystopia to go deeper than the mind, through the flesh, through the bones, to butcher us open and remake us. Love in the most violent sense. The main character is also called Ballard, a privilege which wasn't even afforded to the protagonist of his pseudo-autobiography, and that's not something that happens by accident. Crash is a too-close-for-comfort patholography of its author, and it might just be one of culture as a whole. We're crashing up against climate disaster, we're crashing up against the oil crisis, we're crashing up against the algorithmification of every waking moment, and we're only gaining speed. Look at number go up. Look at meat shredder go brrrr. This isn't the behavior of a species which seeks to swerve, isn't the behavior of a species which seeks to survive the impact. It's the behavior of a species which wants to see the build-up and payoff of a culture-scale explosion, of a species which just wants to see some fucking particles come apart. Accelerationism isn't a prescription, it's a description of the thing capitalism is already doing, and a grim insistence that things will get much worse before they get terminally worse. Late stage? Honey, we're just revving the engine. This is proto-capitalism at worst. Or so thought Nick Land, who is, by the way, the author of that cool little quote from the start of last episode. Land is a reactionary, and I hate everything he stands for, but he's a really cool writer, and he got to his abhorrent conclusions via some deeply scenic and interesting routes. It definitely reframes the "to conclude is not merely erroneous but ugly" in a crueler light, because it would turn into this exact reverence for acceleration. Just keep going. Trying to rein it in will only result in a more boring car crash. It won't actually prevent it. You might wonder how that works, how human extinction could possibly be anything but a conclusion, but take your lens out, the deep one, the human lens, the one that insists that I love people because, well, all I've ever been is people, and you can recast this objection as anthropocentric condescension. Humans aren't the center of the universe. Keeping us around forever would be, to conclude, would be a revolting, strangulating circumscription of creativity and possibility space. We've done people. Let's move on to something actually novel, actually alien, as opposed to iterations on a theme. When asked by a colleague what his thought would mean for humans, what humans should take from it, Land simply replied, mildly incredulous at the idea, that this simply wasn't about them. Someone else could think about people, if they pleased. Humans are a worthy subject of study, sure, but not more so than sea slugs, not more so than any of the species we have eradicated along the ever-accelerating forward march of entropy. Humans fit down the meat shredder just fine. Why should we care about people? Why would anyone care about people? Let's watch some fucking particles come apart. The answer, because we are them, is less intuitive to Land than to most. That's why the idea of accelerationism as a prescription is so weird. Land couldn't care less about what anyone, including himself, thinks of the apocalypse. The idea that he would have any say in it is unfathomable. Land is the garbled poet looking back from beyond heat death, when all the screaming has long stopped and all tragedy has long faded to comedy. He's writing from the perspective of someone enjoying the spectacle of an inevitable explosion, not from that of someone who ever had any means of preventing it. Which brings us back to the central question. What do you do when you accept that there is a monster at the end of all hallways? How does one lose with dignity? I think there's two primary strands of thought in that idea. One of them is that you just keep bashing your head against it. Even if you are 100% certain that the battle is lost, you don't ever have perfect information, and so you might yet be wrong. To die with dignity is to keep trying your hardest to prevent catastrophe to the bitter end. Giving up is the shameful bit. You see it with some terminally ill people, you see it with some climate activists who think that the feedback cycles which will grind our civilizations to dust are probably already unstoppable. But there's nothing left to do but try anyway. Then at least you'll have done your very best, done your part, never given up, and it was certainly the world's fault when you failed, not yours. That's dignity. Land thinks that's kind of pathetic. It's a way of making yourself feel good, and nothing more. Holding out for the possibility that you're wrong is a delusional looking away from the apocalypse, and that's the undignified bit. Refusing to actually face reality, to actually fully concede that anything you do now is pointless. They're the people trying to hit Cthulhu with a boat. The consistent, dignified move is preemptively going insane, accepting Axis as your god, not that it needs worshippers. Dignity is looking at the Stygian abyss and intoning with crystalline, horrific clarity that yes, it will be so. We're gonna crash, and we're gonna crash bad. Now, I agree with neither of those approaches, and I think they're both just ways of making yourself feel good about the inevitable, not that there's anything wrong with that. The question, how do you die with dignity, is ill-posed. It's nonsense. It's like asking, why is 2 + 4 10? It's not. It's a Wittgensteinian pseudo-problem which can't be solved but only dissolved, and it can be dissolved with the following idea expressed by a character who doesn't even actually mean it. Gregory House. There is no such thing as a dignified death. It's always ugly and miserable and pathetic. You can live with dignity, you cannot die with it. I hope you remember masochistic epistemology. We can now look at a really cool use of it as an analytical tool. In Neo-Reaction: A Basilisk, a phenomenal book if you care about these things, Elizabeth Sandifer dissects a particularly interesting and particularly virulent branch of the alt-right, looking primarily at the three wretched little creatures she considers to be the shitty horsemen of this shitty apocalypse. Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is not a reactionary and for whom I have quite a bit more respect than she does, Curtis Mencius Moldbug Yarwin, the racist tech bro to whom we owe the convoluted Matrix metaphor, and my favorite horrifying gremlin man, Nick Land. Moldbug has a habit of framing his writing as this dark, twisted truth that hurts to look at, as a nigh impossible to swallow pill that tears open your gullet with barbed wire and razor blades and burns through your flesh like molten metallic sodium. Charming fella, isn't he? Like, I even sort of agree, Moldbug's writing does hurt to look at, though not for the reasons he thinks it does. Anyway, Sandifer looks at that and goes, nah, you're not miserable enough. If you really had seen a truth this terrible, we could tell. This feels like set dressing, larpy superficial edge like those tactical knives made from shitty steel. Nick Land, on the other hand, had a psychotic breakdown and lost his fucking mind before cutting ties to left-wing academia and becoming evil. Symptomatically, that's a lot more worrying. That actually is the kind of thing we might expect from someone who saw a dark and terrible truth which etched itself into their soul. And yeah, as someone who values meso-ep way too fucking much, as previously discussed, that probably is part of why this man fascinates me so much. I wonder what kind of insight could do that to me. It's only added to by the fact that Land too is, in his own weird way, payoff averse. He doesn't care about the audience, fuck, he doesn't even care about people. There's no conclusion to Runaway, only build-up. There'll be a subjective payoff when the screaming stops, but we won't exactly be around to appreciate it, and I doubt the cosmos cares to laugh at it. One payoff per species, humans like sea slugs. But from the outside, there's only acceleration, and Entropic number go up. To conclude is not merely erroneous, but ugly, so strap in folks. There's a brick on the gas pedal, and neither the steering wheel nor the brakes are working. The funny thing is that back when Land still thought politics could do anything, the thing he thought it could do was start this runaway process to drive reality off a cliff. He criticized feminism as ineffectual because it wasn't as vicious as other social movements. It backed down too easily, unlike, let's say, the alt-right. Which is also interesting for the sheer fact that this reactionary used to be genuinely invested in the success of a progressive movement. He was sincerely saddened by their failure. Land thought that if you want something, you need to make yourself a credible threat. You need to be willing to, and to demonstrate a willingness to infinitely escalate violence. The only way to get what you want is to make it a choice between giving it to you and apocalypse, because you will not back down. You will burn everything to the ground. Sandifer believes that he might be insincere about his turn to neo-reaction, that this might be an elaborate joke, but though she is deeply knowledgeable about the man, I just don't buy it. His writing has always been marked by a pathological inability to not reveal his hand with a wink and a nod. He can't play a bit straight, and sadly, this is a natural progression of his thought. He's not being inconsistent, he's gaining speed. There are exactly 3 games which govern social dynamics: duels, prisoner's dilemmas, and chicken. Never blink first, never swerve, demonstrate a willingness to accelerate until the particles come apart. Organic life splatters against a temporal windshield. Crash. Might as well enjoy it. But alas, I care about people, and I care about others caring about people. I care about people because all I've ever been is people, and that's what makes us human in the first place, isn't it? Though maybe I should stop using that line, since I have recently staked my soul on the idea that none of us are even remotely human anymore anyway. I can see the flickering void behind your eyelids. It's in constant wire-mediated communication with the one behind mine, and that's all that matters at the end of days. At the end of the day is of course what I meant to say. I misspoke.